I work in Washington, as Deisha said, but I live in Maine when I'm not in Washington. Now, New York, Washington, and Maine are three of the most conservative areas in the United States. We dress in white shirts, gray or blue suits, we wear black shoes, we always have a tie on. One of my sons lives in Carlsbad, California, so I talked to him this morning. In fact, I'm staying with him because he and his lovely wife have produced 2 grandchildren, which have made them irrelevant. Yesterday, I got to spend the entire day with my 2 grandsons at that great country, Legoland. I had a wonderful time, but my son last night at dinner said, "Dad, understand, you're from New York, you work in Washington, you live in Maine, this is California. So when you go up there today, understand that you're going to see people that are different. Everybody will be different, they won't dress the same." One of the great things about being in Claremont is you don't have to learn anybody's name. All you have to do is say, "Hello, Dean." 2 out of 3 chances you'll be right. Dean, thank you for hosting. I have a great honor in my life, and that is I get to be the head of this association of those 800,000 men and women who wake up every day and try to discover and try to work to develop therapies that will meet unmet medical needs, that will make patients' lives better, that will save lives. And you're about to embark, and you are embarking, on enhancing that process. Because whether you go to work for a company, whether you go to work in academia, whether you go to work at a hospital, whether you go to work at a pharmacy company, you will be participating in the healthcare delivery system at one of the most astounding times in its history. And today I want to talk about what you'll be facing, what we are facing as we participate in it now, and what are some of the forces are going to be that are going to be changing it as we go through the next several years, because those forces are tectonic in nature right now. Now, I have a wonderful speechwriter, so would you please, you're videotaping this, tell him at least I brought the speech with me. But I condensed it. Just a little bit, because when I was thinking about what I should say today, I was thinking about how eminently forgettable it will be, but I was thinking about the 2 great things that started in 1997. First, of course, you all know, was the HEL 9000 computer. The other, of course, is CAGS. Now, except for those people in the front row, one is fictional. And if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, see 2001 or read 2001, A Space Odyssey. Because one of the things that HEL's adversary says, Dave, why they're doing the science, why they're going on beyond the solar system, is exactly why and what I see when I look out at all of you. It's the stars. You are the stars. And an incredible time. Let me talk about how incredible it is, and then talk about what the challenges are. We are at a point right now, and don't take just my word for it, because I work with a lot smarter people than I am, which is insulting them. I work with really smart people. And I get to see the leaders of the American biopharmaceutical industry, and I have another little group called the Biomedical Advisory Committee that is headed up by Elias Zerhouni and is populated by all of the heads of research of our member companies. So these are really smart women and men. They know what they're talking about. And they are, to the extent that they as scientists can be giddy, and scientists can't be giddy, they are giddy about the promise of the science and the promise of the science of healthcare moving forward. No time in history do you see the promise of healthcare technology and of science greater than where we stand today. And that in itself presents the conflict. And the conflict is, at no time in history than where we stand today, do we see a greater unwillingness to pay for that science, and a greater change and pace of change in the healthcare delivery system that will utilize that science. And so that if we don't bring together the promise of the science with the ability to bring that science to everyone, no matter what their economic status, and if we don't do it within a system that efficiently and effectively treats the patients that it is designed to treat, then you as scientists in the future, we as bureaucrats in the past, will fail. And what we fail, who we fail, are the patients. And I was struck by that, and I was throwing out my speech because I was struck by what are the things that have to be done to make this possible. Well, we have to be entrepreneurial and reflective. We have to be ethical and responsible. We have to be collaborative, and we have to be independent, and we have to be interdisciplinary, and we have to be applied. I didn't make that up. I found it in your brochure. And it really summarizes what my very good speechwriter, with the improbable name of Peter O'Toole. Peter, if you get this video, those words were in your speech. But it really summarizes how we're going to have to deal with the challenges of focus. And so let me talk a little bit about them, because each one of them is unique in of themselves. Let me start with the science, just to put it in perspective. You know, it's a great perspective that we have for where I get to sit, and then as we get to look out on the whole ecosystem and say, where are we at any given time? And every year we do a scorecard. And so last year, John Licklider, I know many of you know John from Eli Lilly, and some of you maybe even spent time in Indianapolis, a wonderful city. Stop it, if you're from California. It is a fabulous city. Think about it this way. When Indianapolis hosted the Super Bowl, anybody know what the Super Bowl is? I know this is Southern California. So it's something that happens every February that doesn't have Southern California teams in it. When they hosted the Super Bowl, the people of Indianapolis knit scarves for the people coming in from around the country who weren't used to the cold. How can you not love a city?
We give them flip-flops.
and sunscreen, right? FDA-approved sunscreen. Look at the science right now. John Licklider and I got to have the privilege of having a press conference that we do every spring, last May, to give you the state of play of where the biopharmaceutical industry stands. Last May, 5,400 medicines in the pipeline, in clinical trials or awaiting clinical trials. But it's not just the number. 70% have the potential to be first in class. That there is nothing else like them out in the healthcare system right now. And the fastest growing portion of the medicines that are in the pipeline right now are personalized medicines. We call it personalized medicine so people can understand. You would recognize them as medicines that are targeted toward genetically homogeneous populations. They are targeted, and they take advantage of the work that was done 10 years ago in unlocking the human genome. And we're finally starting to see it come to fruition and come forward into the pipeline. 5,400 medicines, not all of which will make it because of the nature of our business. So the promise of science has never been greater. When you get together with oncologists, when you get together with researchers, they talk in terms of cancer as a chronic disease within the next 2 or 3 years, most cancers. And if you saw the news this morning or yesterday morning about a new melanoma treatment that is astounding, you're beginning to see some of the immunotherapies that are coming forward that hold a promise that we have never seen in oncology. And you've read about, and I'll come back to it, about a treatment for hepatitis C that is 95% effective. And you look at an ecosystem that took, in my lifetime, When we used to be in New York and people were dying and we were going to be bankrupt as a nation by HIV/AIDS and turned it into a chronic disease, such that if you're an HIV/AIDS positive patient, your life expectancy, if you have access to the therapies, is 3 months less than a non-HIV/AIDS infected person. Remarkable. So the promise of the science has never been better. The pace of change in the healthcare delivery system has never been faster. We have had a healthcare delivery system that for years has seemed to have worked all right if you could have afforded to participate in it. But because there were some 20 or 30 or 40, depends on how you count, million Americans that weren't able to get into the healthcare system, we felt as a nation that we had to refine the healthcare delivery system and the rules by which it was structured. And so as a country now, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we as a nation decided that we would, in a tremendously controversial and divisive battle, change the rules by which we have health insurance. And we enacted the Affordable Care Act. And that is changing the game everywhere. Now, there are bad things about the Affordable Care Act, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, whether you've enrolled or haven't enrolled in it. There are things that need to be fixed. Because nothing that Congress gets is done right the first time. And Congress in science and Congress in healthcare is always very difficult. You know, a long time ago, for those of you who want to get involved in public policy, and I encourage you to do that. A long time ago, I actually was a scientist. I know, hard to believe me. And believe me, if my mother was still alive, she'd say, you do what? I was president of the detention club when I was damn good. I was sent by General Electric to Washington to help solve the energy crisis that occurred in the 70s when there was an Arab oil embargo in response to a small war that, of course, rarely occurs between Israel and its neighbors. And I was sent there to help bring a technology expertise and public policy expertise that I had to the process of the debate on what we could do to enhance developing new technologies. And I found myself testifying with a fellow by the name of George Hatsopoulos, a physicist who was the founder of Thermoelectron, which many of you will now know as Thermo Fisher, a great scientist and a great businessman, testifying in front of what was then called the Senate Interior Committee and is now called the Senate Energy and Environment Policy Committee. But it was the Senate Interior Committee, and George had this wonderful theory that if you were thinking about improving efficiency in energy use in industrial America, that you should do it on the basis of cycle efficiency. And you should do it on the basis of the second law of thermodynamics, which I know you all know. And we had this long discussion about this, and several senators were asking, and then one senator who's no longer there, thank goodness, has passed away to the great beyond, suggested that we amend the second law of thermodynamics. Not making it up, folks. It's in the public record. It's coming from the New York Times under the headline and a four-sided triangle. And I remember George and I looked at each other, and we got both at the same time saying, who's going to answer? And the realization, when you bring tough science to a public policy body, you don't always get good understanding. So the Affordable Care Act was an attempt to fix our healthcare system. But it was an attempt done by people who had strong political agenda on both sides. And not a keen understanding of how the healthcare delivery system works. And not, even though there are a lot of our voices that were out there, and believe me, we were out there, saying what we thought should be done or not should be done. But it is far from perfect. But what it did do, as we sit here in California, is it brought 6 million more Californians into the healthcare system. It brought across America maybe 15, 20 million. And I'm not talking about the enrollees, just the enrollees and the exchanges. But it brought about a fundamental change about the way we begin to think about how we pay for health care. But it didn't come to a conclusion. And so what is happening now is still the debate between, do I pay for activity, which is the old system, whether it's good or bad, whether you live or die, whether you're readmitted or not readmitted, or do I pay for results? Do I pay for quality? Do I pay for the kinds of things that you and I purchase when we go to an electronics store or when we go to a car manufacturer? And it never got resolved, and it needs to be resolved because it bears on what you're going to be doing in the future. And it bears on the way you're going to be doing it in the future. And let me give you an example, just a story. I happen to sit on the board of directors of the Johns Hopkins Medical System Sibley Hospital. Wonderful system. Responding to half of that act in a terrific way, just as well as we can respond by reaching forward into the community and making sure that any patient that we serve that has a chronic disease, diabetes and hypertension particularly, is completely covered, counseled, gets their medication for free, no co-pays. They get their medication, we go after and make sure they're taking it. It has been astounding on how good the performance has been. Not only has it been so good, but we've saved a lot of money. Like $15 million in the first year. It's not only good for the patients, it's good for the payers. Now, we're not going to fire the CEO, but we're thinking about it because we're losing $30 million because we're not filling the hospital beds in the 6 hospitals we have in our system. That's the flaw. That wasn't getting resolved. That didn't get resolved. So if you're in the School of Pharmacy, everything that you will be doing to promote the production and the use of medicines that address chronic diseases and keep patients out of a hospital bed will run exactly counter to your colleagues who go to medical school or in medical technology that are sitting around our hospitals waiting for somebody to come in and fill that bed. And that's a conflict that we have to resolve. Now, the third conflict that we have that has to be resolved is the one about access to drugs. We in the industry, whether we're in medical devices or biopharmaceuticals, say that intellectual property is the lifeblood of our industry. And if you're coming into our industry, as you will know, as your colleagues here on the faculty know, everything you think, see, and experience, you write down and you try to get it patented. Because that's our system of encouraging you to be able to work and others to be able to invest in your work. Talking about those startups that you are so rightly being very proud of. But that's not the broad view around the world. There are many people, many places, many countries in the world that say that intellectual property rights are exactly the cause of the inability of people of lower economic status to get access to the medicines that they need. And so we should diminish intellectual property rights so we have more access. Fair. But the intellectual property rights that we have are really the only way that we can encourage investment. And so the problem becomes, how do you have the two together? Because to develop a medicine, it takes about 12 to 15 years. It costs about $1.5 billion. Now that's a number we constantly use as the industry. I think the number is not true. I think it's closer to $4 billion. And if you get to $4 billion, the reason I can get to $4 billion is I can take the $52 billion our companies spent in research and development divided by the number of medicines approved, and it comes out to $4 billion, not $1.5 billion. Now maybe that's too simple for other people, but it's an expensive proposition. And people don't have to invest in our process, but if they do, we have to give them some kind of fair return. And in the United States, we have a system called Hatch-Waxman that says you get to keep it, your intellectual property, for so many years, and then you put it and it becomes generic. And we love generics. And many of you are going to work in small molecules with generics. Many of you are going to work in biosimilars. We love them too. They're all our children. And it is a process by which we take very expensive investment and make it become more and more affordable. So to the point that 85% of all the prescriptions that are written today in the United States are for generics. But how do you start? So let's look at the ones that have been in the paper. Let's look at one particular, Sovaldi. I have a little jar in my office. If you say the word Sovaldi, you put $1 in, we give it to the homeless guy at the corner. At the end of the day, the guy's rich, he's bought a car. And because it has been the consuming topic in healthcare. But it gets to these first three conflicts, and maybe even to the fourth that I'll bring up in a second. Sovaldi costs $94,000. Takes a year, that's the therapy. $84,000, excuse me. More expensive than it is. See, it's already got a discount. $84,000. It is about 90–95% effective. Fair amount. If you're a payer, you're going to say, wait a minute, $84,000, you'll bankrupt this system. Same words we heard about HIV/AIDS, by the way, in the late 80s and early 90s. You're going to bankrupt the system. Why? Because all we do is account for the cost of therapies as a cost. We have no mechanism to look at the value. So think about the HIV, or think about the Hep C patient, okay? Typical therapy for a Hep C patient over the years, year in, year out, is about $100,000, $125,000 a year. If they get to the acute stage of it and they require a liver transplant is about $500,000. The regime for anti-rejection drugs, year in, year out, for as long as that patient lives, is about $200,000. But for $84,000, 95% of them won't get it. In our system, we count the $84,000, not the millions that are saved. In our system, we're even a little bit more perverse, because our payment systems were developed at a time when medicines and therapies and devices and diagnostics were pretty rudimentary. You got sick, you went to a hospital, we gave you antibiotics, we gave you pain medicine, we cut out what was making you sick. So here's what happens, out-of-pocket expenses. If you're a patient in the United States and you're sick, and you go to an emergency room, your out-of-pocket expenses are about 5% of the total cost. If you go into the hospital, it's about 4%. If you go see your doctor and talk about not going to the hospital or the emergency room, it's about 17%. If she prescribes you a medicine, it's 26%. So our systems show you that the most expensive thing that you can do, second most expensive, is take a medicine to avoid it. So think about it this way, diabetes, okay? Think about all of you are going to be looking at a multiplicity of treatments for type 2 diabetes, onset diabetes, as you're going forward. And you're going to be counseling patients because you're going to be at the front line. They're going to come in, they're going to say, what do I do, what do I take, how do I deal with this, what's this little meter mean? And you're going to take from them most of the money. Because the annual diabetes regime is a couple thousand, $2,400 a year. Okay? And they have to pay most of it. Yet if they fail to take their regime and they go into extreme cardiovascular collapse, they have to have an amputation, they have to go on dialysis. Dialysis is $84,000 a year. We pay for all that. And the worst part of it is if they went to their physician, or they went to a clinician, if they went to any healthcare professional and said, how can I change my lifestyle so I can avoid type 2 diabetes and I can have my weight in proper proportion, which mine isn't. We don't pay for that at all. We don't pay for that at all. So we make prevention and treatment the most expensive part of the healthcare delivery system. Think about if we can continue down this road. So Hep C is what's in the headlines now. Forget about Hep C. I mean, it's an important disease, and if you have it, it's a horrible disease. Think about ulcers. You don't do anything. None of you are successful at what you do. Everything stays where we are today. In the year 2050, 15 million Americans will have Alzheimer's. Horrible. It's a thief. You didn't do anything to get it. It steals your mind. And it's probably worse on the caregiver than it is on the patient, God forbid. But under the current standard of care in the United States today, those 15 million Americans will cost this country $1.1 trillion a year. And as my sons Lyle and Eric say, you ain't going to be around for it, Dad. Lyle and Eric are the Menendez $1.1 trillion a year. Yet if I could invent a medicine, I could discover a medicine that could just defer. If I could just defer the onset of the symptoms of Alzheimer's by 5 years, the Alzheimer's Association tells us I'll save $450 billion of that $1.1 trillion a year. Now what would you pay for that? Right now, our system won't pay for it. So, promise of the science and the cost of the science. We have to get that nationalized. The healthcare system, the way it's structured, the conflict between what we know is wrong, which is prevention and avoidance of acute care and management, and what we actually incentivize, which is go to the emergency room, check yourself into the hospital, avoid taking the kinds of medicines. Heck, we can't. I mean, one of the big challenges you're going to face in the School of Pharmacy, whichever one of the teal group is the School of Pharmacy. Raise your hands. School of Pharmacy. Okay. Whether you're working for us or you're working for CVS Health Systems, by the way, they used to be called CVS Government, CVS Health Systems. Okay. Whether you're working for either one of us or you're in the hospital system, it doesn't do you any good because half the people who get a prescription won't fill it. And half of them won't take it to its fruition. And if you try to come forward out in front of that desk and say, I want to talk to you about adherence, we've got to come up with a better word. I talk to my dog about adherence. He doesn't listen either. I'm 0 for 3 with men in my life. If we talk about the need for adherence, nobody pays for it. Yet we know it'll save $300 billion a year. $300 billion in the healthcare system. Which, by the way, might pay for Alzheimer's, or might pay for Hep C, or might pay for oncology. That's that. The third is nothing works if we don't work together. It gets to collaboration and it gets to ethics. In the old days, in the biopharmaceutical industry, where shots on goal, we made tons of money. It was just terrific. We all went into our labs, we didn't talk to anybody else, we were competing with everybody else. Investors were dying to give us their money, whether we were small, large, or in between. We spent a lot of money. And then the investors woke up one day and said, wait a minute, it takes 12 years, costs $1.5 billion, I don't think anybody's going to pay for it. We're going into cosmetics and soft drinks. You make more money in terms of returns if you're in cosmetics or soft drinks. You look good, you might be dying, but you look good. We have to change it. You cannot sustain a system that patients cannot afford. I cannot have a healthcare system that works for the very wealthy people in Southern California and doesn't work for the poorest people in South Africa. I cannot have a healthcare system that the new oligarchs in Russia can afford to take advantage of, and the average patient in Mumbai can never see. I can't have one that works for the west side of Los Angeles and not the east side of Los Angeles. We have to rationalize. How do we do it? First, we've got to get better at the way we discover medicine. This idea that we're still doing medicine on a 40-year-old system that is a double-blind placebo study in the age of electronic healthcare records when everybody sitting in this room is the placebo. That we go through a regulatory process that takes a long period of time because we are so either risk averse or so unable to move our own regulatory expertise and our regulatory science forward so that we are cutting edge. Where here, even at Keck, where you have your great rare disease focus here, where we have most of, or a lot of the natural history of those diseases that's being created on the internet that the FDA still doesn't have the rules to allow us to communicate on, it has to change. We have to be collaborative. And what you're seeing happening in the industry is those shots on goals, those walls, where it all was done within my realm, is changing. And so last year, beginning in 2014, we announced at PhRMA that every member of PhRMA made a commitment that we will share all of our clinical trial data with any legitimate researcher, provided they promise to do two things: protect the patient and the confidential information that is related to the patients, and protect the commercial information so that they can't take advantage of it over the people who invested in it. We will share all of it. And we've started doing that, and our companies are doing that. Why? Because we need the ecosystem to be larger. And where here in Southern California you've seen venture capitalists pull away from investment in devices and drugs, we haven't come in as ourselves as an industry and said we need to invest and partner with the academic researcher, with the small researcher, with the physician, with the academic communities, with the hospitals, because we need a collaborative and open system. And to have a collaborative and open system that will improve the efficiency by which we discover the new treatments, we're going to have to all trust each other. And to trust each other, we're going to have to understand that we're going to have relationships. And the best of the relationships are where they are patient-centered. And that, yes, you may as a physician be on our payroll, or as a professor you may be on our payroll, but we will disclose it. And if you don't understand it or you're skeptical about it, well, I'm sorry, but it's going to be there. Ask the person giving the money and getting the money. And so we have, as an industry, supported the so-called sunshine rules to get that out there, because if we can't have an ethical and productive relationship with every part of the ecosystem, then we will never bring those costs down. And the measure of the evidence is, does everything that we do forward what our mission is? And that is to bring new therapies and new hope to patients. So next week in Washington, we're going to have our Research and Hope Awards, our third annual Research and Hope Awards. It's an amazing system. We used to have Discover Awards, where we used to bring in our own scientists and pat ourselves on the head about how wonderful we are. And oddly enough, the company who was the incoming chairman of the board of PhRMA always seemed to win it. We're not stupid. But our companies have decided that's completely different. Because in order for us to be credible, what we ought to celebrate is not the great work that our people do, and they do great work, and I hope you'll come and join us, but the great work that is done in partnership with us in academic institutions like KGI, that is done in hospitals, that is done in clinics, that is done in government work here and around the world. Because that's the only way we're going to lower the cost of discovering and utilizing and bringing these great new systems and these great new therapies to patients. It's only by opening up and understanding the full dynamic of the healthcare system and participating in it as a trusted participant will we as an industry, and will every aspect of the industry and every aspect of the healthcare delivery system be able to get together and improve both the outcome and the cost of the healthcare delivery system. And it is only by that collaboration and by that fostering of the independent work and by the principles that are here for KGI that we're going to have any chance of making that promise of that science be something that is realized by the patients that so desperately need. You know, nothing in any of our lives makes more of a difference and makes more of an incentive for us to get up and face the demons that we have to face every day. And then going into a healthcare setting and seeing the patient who was relieved, the patient who was cured, the caregiver who was free to focus on the rest of what they have to do in their lives for their family. That's what it's all about. I'd love to have you come and do it and believe that it is best done in America's biopharmaceutical industry. And that's what we're working for every day. And I thank you for inviting me here, not because it's Southern California and I get to see a sea of teal, but because behind each one of these teal shirts, and by the way, the black shirts too, is the promise and the hope for patients that we're all here to serve. Thank you, and have a wonderful 4 years. The question, if you couldn't hear it, is and you were at Amgen, so you got to see this when the Pharmaceutical came out. Pharmaceutical is how we interact with healthcare professionals as the pharmaceutical industry. The internet. Anybody heard of it? Everybody in the whole ecosystem of healthcare and the whole ecosystem of pharmacy and medicine has discovered something called the internet, with the exception of 2 groups, one of which hasn't yet been discovered, and the other which, even though we know about it, is not able to use it. The first is the FDA, sorry to say. The second is us in the pharmaceutical industry. Interestingly enough, almost everybody can talk about anything related to any medicine in any context, except for us as an industry. We can only talk about it in the context of what is on the label and what is approved by the FDA on the label. So we have said, look, this is not good for the patient. Because 2 things are happening that is reality. And that is that patients are getting more and more information about treatments, whether it's medicines or any other treatment that are available to them or that they are choosing through that great scientific source, Wikipedia. It's the #1 source, survey after survey, for patients. And all the great things that are being learned in the healthcare delivery system and in the scientific ecosystem, if we talk about them as the industry, or we talk to you about them as a physician or a patient, we get fined millions and billions of dollars. I mean, basically that's what that money that you always say, oh, off-label marketing, that's a nice way to say, we got talking about something that everybody else in the world could talk about, and we shouldn't. Well, the Constitution is on our side. The Supreme Court has actually ruled in our favor, as the Second Circuit Court. And unlike what most of the world expected, by the way, I picked up the paper after the Sorrell decision of the Supreme Court, and they said, here comes the pharmaceutical industry. Anybody seen the movie Love and Other Drugs? This is what's going to happen. We didn't. We sat quiet. And we said we're going to take a very considered approach to this. And the approach is what we want to do is be able to talk about truthful and not misleading information with healthcare professionals. And we want to find a way to do that, and we approached the FDA, and we said we'd like to do this, we need to do it quickly, because everybody else in the world is doing it, and we want to make sure they're getting the best information. The FDA said, we want to do it too, but not as fast as you want. So that's it. #2, we said, well, by the way, there's this thing called the internet, and people are out there, and patients are out there all the time, and docs are out there, and that's where people are getting information. It's not accurate necessarily. We can't, but what we do when people come into our websites, we're limited to what we can say. People are going other places getting information, some of which is accurate, some of which is highly inaccurate. Other participants in the healthcare system have a website. I mean, I have to bribe my own physician, so I can go on my MD. I'm sorry. I pay a fee to have my own physician continue to see me at MD-VIP. Those are going to read about physicians. We're going to have that conversation later. But it's a help. But I go on and talk to them on the internet, and I get all sorts of information on it. I get it from CVS on the internet. I can go to Walgreens and get it on the internet. But I can't get it in drug-specific information because the FDA is still not formulated its rules. So the answer is we are trying to get reasonable rules both in communication between and among healthcare professionals, their patient-centered, and reasonable rules and a recognition of the reality of the internet out of the FDA so that we can make sure that what patients are seeing is accurate. And what patients are relying on is truthful and is able to be used for their own benefit, and that we can use them to our benefit. I'll give you an example, and we were talking about it earlier. The Journal of Health Informatics. You all read it. Last year, 2 years ago, the great medical institutions of Google and Microsoft did a healthcare study with 16,000 patients. And all it did was recruit 16,000 patients that were taking a statin and an antidepressant. And all they did was follow what they did on the internet in terms of their numbers. They volunteered. And they found a drug-drug interaction that caused hypoglycemia, and not one drop of blood was taken. And when they went back and said, okay, let me take your blood, it was there. How? Not by the very expensive, I mean, we would have spent $300 million doing this, right? They did it by just following what was going on in their searches on the internet. And it was there. It was real. Because if you have hypoglycemia, you have certain, obviously, symptoms. And you were going on the internet saying, gee, what if it is, I got this in the afternoon, I'm tired, I have this dry mouth, and I'm looking this up, and it turned out it's true. We gotta use that. Otherwise, it's going to cost $2 billion of medicine. And that's what the problem is. Yes?
You mentioned the need for teamwork and collaboration.
Yeah.
And also the need for IP protection. How do those two not fight each other? Like, how do you have different companies work together when you have like business interests not work together?
It's a good question. The question was, I mentioned the need for collaboration and teamwork, and I mentioned the need for IP protection to continue to stimulate investment. So how do those two come together? And let me give you two examples that I think are indicative of it. One is you identify where you can do teamwork in a so-called pre-competitive space. Now, the pre-competitive space is defined as much science and discussion you can get away with before the lawyers stand up and say, excuse me. I've been able to find it any other way. So, in the area of oncology, we have something called the CEO Cancer Roundtable. Marty Murphy, if anybody remembers Dr. Murphy, who was the chief health advisor to President Bush 41, George Herbert Walker Bush, is the head of it. There are 8 companies that are involved in the development of oncology medicines. There is a computer software company by the name of SAS that is involved in analytics, high data analytics, and there are 5 universities that are involved in it, and we are all sharing our clinical trial data and our laboratory data that is common to a whole set of cancers before those cancers present enough, before we have developed enough of a target to be able to have a proprietary approach. And so the lawyers are happy with it. It took a year to get the lawyers happy with it. The companies are happy with it. The investors are happy with it. The participants are happy with it. It works great from a pre-competitive standpoint. On the other end of the spectrum is, in a post-competitive stuff, we're willing to share that data with you, but you can't capitalize on the data, which is incumbent in our principles of clinical trial data sharing. And that is, you can have it, you can see it, but you can't go sell it to an investor. But you can come back to me as the owner and say, hey, I found a better way. And then you might be a partner with us because you'll own that property. So those are 2 ways we're doing it, are restricting what you can do with it and restricting and working in the pre-competitive space. The real challenge comes outside of the discovery process. And that is, how do you continue to stimulate investment in the next best medicine, but still bring the results of that medicine to people who will never be able to afford it? You know, we have this absurd argument day in and day out in the government of India, where they are very active in compulsory licensing. They just expropriate intellectual property for their. I had this great argument with their economics minister, who told me that even the most fundamental chemist, the dumbest chemist in the world, which I think he's referring to me, knows that Gleevec was not a breakthrough. Okay, so they have a compulsory license for Gleevec in India. But even with compulsory licensing, the cost of Gleevec in India is still more than the annual per capita spending per patient on all healthcare in India. So in order to serve the Indian patient, we have to figure out a way, or any patient that cannot afford the medicine, whether they're American, Indian, or South African, anywhere in the world, of how do you figure out a way to have those who can afford it pay for it, and those who cannot afford it get to fruition. That's the real challenge. We're trying to work that. So right now, collaboration, and the president is about to cut me off. One more?
One more. I wasn't sure what
From the teal shirts.
What are the teal shirts?
Which one do you got? party? Yes, sir.
You briefly mentioned disparities in accessibility. Kind of in the healthcare system, at least with Latino communities, there's been kind of a resurgence of community health workers or quotas. Now, I was wondering, what is Pharmaceuticals? What are they doing to kind of change this disparity, these accessibility issues?
Yeah. Well, one of the most important things that we're doing is making sure that diverse communities understand and know and can believe that we're making medicines for them. We are very good at making medicines for middle-aged white guys. We are working our puppies to the quick to expand the participants in the clinical trial process. And in conjunction with the Hispanic Medical Association, with the National Minority Quality Forum, and with the Association of Asian and Pacific Island Physicians, we have launched something called I'm In. And you'll start to see it here very soon. And it deals, and it will be working here in Southern California, among other places in the country, as a pilot program. And that is, we need to increase the diversity of the participants in our clinical trial process. You are not, as an African American, as a Hispanic, or as an Asian, going to trust the medicines that we develop if they're all developed for this guy. Okay? And so we have been working very, very, very aggressively to expand diversity in the clinical trial process, our portion of it. But it is also essential for us to expand the diversity of the people who are in our laboratories and who are in our businesses. Why? Because that's the world. And this is not unique to our industry, but it is important for our industry because if you look at medical schools now, I dare say if you look at KGI, although I can't do it quickly, but you may have, Shelley, 60% of the students in medical school now are women. Which my wife, who hired me for my first job before she was my wife, by the way, would point out that I at one time in my previous life wasted $250,000 on a study that absolutely proved that women were smarter than men. And and when I came home with it and showed her it, and she said, idiot, of course. In fact, you should spend the money. Now, but the fact is that if we're going to have the best minds and the best science in the world, then we have to have the best of the populations that are developing and learning and participating in the whole scientific endeavor. And that is much more than middle-aged white guys. We have to have leaders in our industry, leaders in academia, leaders in government who can be role models for young women, young Hispanics, young African Americans, as well as young Caucasians, to say, hey, I can be that person, and therefore I want to pursue this. Because otherwise we end up as a world full of investment bankers and lawyers. And I don't know about you folks, they're wonderful people, and they're necessary, but they don't develop a lot of life-saving therapies. So, thank you again for